It's August 2022, and over the last 24 months, Michael Saylor has been touted as a business genius, a crypto pioneer, and an innovator that many companies will follow. Having appeared on some of the largest podcasts in the world, gaining millions of views, things are looking great for Saylor. But not today. On August 2nd, 2022, Michael Saylor stepped down as CEO of MicroStrategy, the company he co-founded, after they reported a loss of almost $1 billion. A loss that was almost single-handedly Saylor's fault. You see, Saylor began using MicroStrategy's excess cash to begin purchasing Bitcoin in 2020. But when the inevitable crypto winter hit, with Bitcoin losing well over 50% of its value, MicroStrategy's balance sheet went from bad to worse. And eventually, the public backlash from shareholders became too much. But Saylor didn't leave the company. In fact, under his new role as executive chairman, he'll be dedicating even more of his time to the company's Bitcoin investment strategy. That's right, Saylor isn't backtracking. In fact, he's actually doubling up on his Bitcoin bet. So what's going on here? With a net worth of $1.2 billion and a company that owns 140,000 Bitcoin, who is Michael Saylor? And what are the dangerous implications of him owning almost 1% of all Bitcoin in existence? It's 1992 and Michael Saylor is only 27 years old. He's been working on MicroStrategy, a company that he founded with Sanju Bansal, his MIT fraternity brother. The idea was initially to develop software for data mining, a potentially lucrative business with the rise of the internet. But early on, they struggled to gain momentum. It's been a difficult 3 years for Saylor and MicroStrategy, but Saylor is confident that his experience at DuPont just 4 years prior is going to prove pivotal. At the time, Saylor worked at the massive and infamous multinational chemical company, innovating computer models that would help DuPont anticipate market shifts. And Saylor wasn't responsible for just some computer model that was an afterthought for DuPont. Saylor's models correctly predicted that many of DuPont's major markets would experience a recession in 1990. But it was rarely a smooth road, especially when you single-handedly tell a multi-billion-dollar company that they're about to lose money. As a result, DuPont purchased computers with 10 times the processing power to run Saylor's models once more, only to discover, much to their disappointment, that he was indeed correct. This was a massive achievement for the MIT grad, but it also led to a life-changing opportunity. Because he proved to DuPont his abilities, DuPont became the unofficial venture capitalist that backed MicroStrategy during its first year of operations in 1989. But it's now 1992, 3 years since starting the company, and everything is about to change for Michael Saylor. With the rise of technology, more and more massive companies with money to burn were looking to invest in any kind of technology that would give them an advantage, that would allow them to squeeze out extra profits from their business. And what was huge in the 90s? If you're a 90s kid, what did you grow up eating? McDonald's, of course. That's right. In 1992, a year after MicroStrategy introduced its first software product, they somehow managed to secure a $10 million contract with McDonald's. In the deal, MicroStrategy agreed to build software that would help McDonald's better understand the effectiveness of their promotional campaigns. Now, for a 27-year-old to secure a $10 million contract, you might think that Saylor would have made it, would have maybe eased off the gas a little bit, but that couldn't be further from the truth and what happened. The stories of what Saylor was like during the early days of MicroStrategy, you might think that you'd be listening to a story of Steve Jobs. As they worked to fulfill the contract, even into 1994, Saylor slept on his co-founder Sanju Bansal's couch. Eventually, Saylor would buy a house, but it remained empty, without any furniture. Bansal said that Saylor began to relax ever so slightly a few years in, but that he used to yell and scream and rant and rave the first couple of years. Everyone seemed to him to be an obstacle rather than a potential helper, but he now realizes fire and brimstone motivation is not effective. It sounds so much like Steve Jobs that the similarities are almost spooky. There's no doubt that Saylor had some kind of chip on his shoulder, and during the research process of this video, it didn't take long to discover exactly what that chip was. And when I found it, I quickly realized what was at stake for Saylor and why failure simply wasn't an option. It's the late 1980s. Saylor is a young man and has graduated from MIT with a double major in aeronautics and astronautics. Having received an Air Force scholarship, he promised his father that he would join the military, and so that's exactly what he did. Saylor joined the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps and was selected for the prestigious jet pilot program. To put it into perspective, this was the time of Tom Cruise and Top Gun. There was nothing cooler in the world than being a jet pilot, and Saylor was loving every second of it. Getting an opportunity to pay off his college bills and make his father proud, everything was going great. Until one day, during a routine medical exam, everything came crashing down. During the exam, doctors discovered that Saylor had a benign heart tumor, and as a result, the military immediately grounded him permanently. Saylor's dreams of becoming a fighter were destroyed. And that's what was at stake for Saylor and MicroStrategy. Having had one dream taken from him, it was clear in how he approached his business with the level of relentlessness that he had that he wasn't going to let that happen again. Need proof? Fast forward to 1996, and MicroStrategy, 7 years in, is now working with 150 companies such as AT&T and Johnson & Johnson, and their revenue has increased by 100% every year for the last 6 years, bringing their annual revenue to $25 million. And Michael Saylor is barely 30 years old. So, a young company with an entrepreneur with a chip on his shoulders grows a company to multi-million-dollar figures within several years. It's not a unique story. We hear it all the time. But what if I told you it gets even better? You see, anybody can take on millions of dollars of debt and pour gasoline onto the fire and operate for years with huge revenue, but not being profitable at all. But that wasn't Saylor. And I believe that Saylor's experience in the military, the experience that led to his dream of being a fighter pilot dying, actually in some ways led to him being risk averse. It gave him a real life example of what risk truly is. And we see this with MicroStrategy. Yep, in 1996, MicroStrategy doesn't have a single dollar of debt and is operating on a 25% profit margin. Michael Saylor isn't just making decent money, he became a millionaire before he was 30. Over the next decade, Saylor would lead MicroStrategy to become a multi-billion-dollar company that went public in 1998 at $6 a share, just 9 years after it started. During the IPO, the company raised $28 million and was valued at $280 million. And at face value, with all of that being said, it sounds like Michael Saylor just walked off into the sunset as a successful billionaire and accomplished all of his goals. But the truth is, that's far from what happened. It's now July 2020, and Michael Saylor is on MicroStrategy's quarterly earnings conference call. Shareholders are eagerly waiting to hear how the company is doing, how sales are, and what earnings forecasts are for the next several quarters. But this wasn't a typical earnings call. In fact, Michael was about to make an announcement that wouldn't only shock shareholders, but would shake the corporate world and create a ton of noise. That's right, it all began in July 2020 when Saylor announced that MicroStrategy had begun exploring the possibility of purchasing Bitcoin. Now, without context, this might not seem like a huge deal, but in 2020, Bitcoin still hadn't gone on its incredible rise to $60,000 and was still hovering around $10,000. And there was still a lot of skepticism and controversy surrounding cryptocurrency, certainly more than there continues to be to this day. But Saylor didn't care. In fact, the shopping spree began just a month after his initial announcement. MicroStrategy used $250 million from its cash stockpile to purchase 21,454 Bitcoin, and that was just the beginning. MicroStrategy bought an additional $175 million of Bitcoin in September 2020 and another $50 million in December. Businesses trying to figure out how to use their excess cash reserves isn't uncommon. After all, with record high inflation, any money that you leave in your bank account is going to lose its purchasing power over time. So trying to determine how to use this excess cash at the bare minimum to protect your purchasing power, or more ideally how to grow it and how to grow your wealth, is not groundbreaking. But get this. On December 11th, 2020, MicroStrategy, already owning hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, announced that they were taking on debt to increase their Bitcoin position. And we're not talking small boy stuff here. Nope, they sold $650 million in senior convertible notes to finance the purchase. And this officially marked the beginning of their massive investment. Over the next several years, MicroStrategy continued to purchase Bitcoin. And as of this recording, they now own a total of 140,000 Bitcoin, worth over $12 billion. This means that Michael Saylor owns almost 1% of all Bitcoin in existence. So for a crypto that is decentralized, that is designed for no one person or institution or central authority to have control over it, what does it mean for Saylor to own so much of it? And what are the risks or potential risks associated with him owning almost 1% of all Bitcoin in existence? And lastly, perhaps even more importantly, why is Saylor so convinced that Bitcoin is the future?
Well, what if I told you you're going to lose all your money? What if I told you the currency is going to collapse to zero in 3 months? Which is kind of what it did in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Or what if I told you we're going to have 95% inflation? I think the unofficial inflation rate in Argentina is like 85% this year. What if I told you we're going to have hyperinflation? Everything will be twice as expensive next year. Now how long would you wait before you took a risk?
It would take an entire video to fully break down what the Federal Reserve has done over the last few years and the risks that it poses to the US dollar collapsing. But the truth is, it's already started to happen and has been happening for the last 100 years. Just take a look at this chart that shows just how dramatic the decline of the US dollar has been since the 1900s. Ever since President Nixon removed the US from the gold standard in 1971, the Federal Reserve has been able to print money at the press of a button and has been doing so at historical, astronomical levels since 2020. In the Western world, we like to think that we are immune from things that have happened everywhere else in the world, but that they simply could not happen to us. Hyperinflation being just one simple example. With banks such as SVB and Silvergate collapsing, the second largest bank collapse in US history that the news isn't saying a word about, to threats of Social Security running out by 2035, raising the national debt to unbelievable heights, and Janet Yellen warning that the Treasury could run out of cash as soon as June 1st, the writing is on the wall for the United States. Unless we see some kind of dramatic shift in the near future, unless Americans stop dancing on TikTok, it's very likely that the US will not be the global #1 superpower in the near future. And with that comes tremendous risks. But this is ultimately where Bitcoin can come in. Bitcoin was created exactly for these reasons. It was created in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and its decentralized and finite nature. Only 21 million Bitcoin do and ever will exist. And that is what could potentially make it the new global reserve currency. Let's take a deeper look into the 3 reasons why Saylor famously said you should never sell your Bitcoin, and why he is convinced that the price of Bitcoin is only going to continue to rise.
Think of it as, here's my model for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's price is going up because of inflation. Saifedean says 14%, right? We know that in the absence of everything else, if you had complete adoption, if 8 billion people had Bitcoin, and we had world currencies, and the US dollar was the world currency, and we inflated it 14% a year, then you would think Bitcoin would go up 14% every year as the currency kept getting inflated. So the price of the dominant monetary network or dominant monetary asset goes up by inflation. And the second dynamic is adoption. There's a rip, right? That if there's $100 billion of demand for Bitcoin, then it's going to go up faster than the 14% because there's a short squeeze as people are trying to buy the stuff faster than the market wants to sell. And if you went from 1% adoption to 2% adoption, you could imagine that the price could double just because the adoption doubled, even in no inflation, right?
Correct.
And then the third driver is utility. If this is common sense, right? You ever send Bitcoin to anybody else on the main chain and you want to send $37 and it takes you an hour and you got a fee. And then when Cash App came out and said you could just send it via cash tag, or you get a Lightning, that's the proprietary way called Layer 3. And the Layer 2 Lightning way is I got a Lightning wallet and I zap it for 1 Satoshi in a split second. Remember the big smile that brings to your face?
It's pretty fun.
Okay. Did it not make you think that Bitcoin is more valuable? Like Bitcoin's utility explodes. If I can move the money at the speed of light on the Layer 2 or the Layer 3, and if I can do 1 billion transactions a day, or let's take El Salvador, right? 3 million people download a wallet and they start doing remittances. Is there demand for Bitcoin? Sure there is.
Number 1 is inflation. Secondly, we have mass adoption. And third, we have utility. These are the 3 reasons why Saylor is convinced that Bitcoin is going to continue rising in price and why he continues to buy more even to this day. So what's going on here? Is Saylor a complete genius? Is Bitcoin actually the investment of this generation? And Saylor is simply a messenger that is helping all of us that are eager enough to listen to him? Well, it turns out that when Saylor had to step down as CEO of MicroStrategy because his Bitcoin investment lost the company almost $1 billion, it wasn't the first time that he faced massive public controversy.
Well, Bitcoin's the best performing asset for the past decade, and it's 100x better than gold, and it's 10x better than equity portfolios. So the volatility is the price you pay for the performance that you get.
It's March 2020, and Michael Saylor just broke a record. He accomplished something that no human had ever accomplished before. He lost $6 billion in a single day. You see, for all of the hyping up I've done of Michael Saylor in this video, if we back up just 20 years, we'll discover that he faced tremendous backlash, and it's actually incredible that he didn't step down as CEO of MicroStrategy sooner. Let me explain. In March 2000, in a single day, MicroStrategy stock dropped 62% after Saylor admitted that its 1999 revenues were 25% less than they originally claimed they were, and that the profits that they said they generated in 1999 were actually a loss on the balance sheet. The drop in stock price is what tanked Saylor's personal net worth by $6 billion in a single day, but unfortunately, he only had himself to blame. In December 2000, Saylor would settle with the SEC without admitting any wrongdoing and paying a fine of just $350,000. Saylor was also in the hot seat in 2020 when he put out a statement to all MicroStrategy employees entitled, "My Thoughts on COVID-19. He said that it is, quote, soul-stealing and debilitating to embrace the notion of social distancing and economic hibernation, and predicted that in the worst case scenario, global life expectancy would only click down by a few weeks." Of course, in hindsight, everything he said was 100% correct, but at the time, the crazy Karens didn't like what he had to say about it. And what about on August 31st, 2022, when the controversies continued, when Saylor was sued for tax fraud, being accused of illegally avoiding more than $25 million in DC taxes by pretending to be a resident of other jurisdictions. But of course, nobody is perfect. Every sinner has a future and every saint has a past, and turning Saylor into this larger than life figure only leaves room for all of us to be disappointed. But one thing is certain, Saylor is not going to quit. And to prove it, I'd like to leave you with this story. In the mid-1990s, there was this incredible story, according to DuPont executives, that one day on his way to work, Saylor flipped his red Toyota sports car several times on an icy highway. He escaped, but not without tons of cuts and bruises. And do you know the first place that he went to afterwards? To the office. He headed straight back to work, not skipping a single beat. And that is Michael Saylor, the man that owns all the Bitcoin. Play the long game. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.